Okay, so we are recording, and let's see here. Yep, I think we're good to go. Yeah, so thank you for joining us this morning. I know a number of people are not with us, so hopefully if you're not with us in person, you'll get to watch this later. In fact, just one quick comment. I need to reach out to Dayton, I think, and I should have followed up with this earlier. It's just been a busy week. His emails keep bouncing. When I send something out, his always comes back. So he may not even have got notification of this meeting. So I need to reach out to him or figure out whether he's getting any of the stuff that I'm sending out.
He would. He usually, if he can't get on the Zoom, Lloyd, he would text me. I haven't got a text message or anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. I just something I just realized that he might be left out in the wilderness somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to pick up on this conversation. We've only got a couple of weeks left to do this, and today we're going to focus on missional communities and how that fits into this whole decentralization discussion. And get this set up here. I think we're good. Let's see here.
Sure.
Okay, you should be able to see now.
Yep, that's it.
Good. Okay, so let's kind of do go back to last time and just see if anybody had any work done on the assignment where we asked the question, how does your congregation distinguish and maximize centered and bounded sets? And I don't know if anyone even remembers what we talked about, but was there any reflection on that? If not, we'll move forward, but I always like to just check in on the assignment that I gave to see if anyone had any questions or was working through this and had any insights, discoveries.
We sort of talked about our little fellowship group on Tuesday evening, talked about it, Lloyd, on Zoom, and I had to explain to them they didn't really know what a centered set and a bounded set is. So, and I had actually, what you had told us, and then I also went into it myself. I didn't realize C.S. Lewis was a proponent of this as well. I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't.
I'd heard that before. Okay.
Yeah, I said. Yeah, he states that a centered set church is not concerned with artificial boundaries that bounded set churches have traditionally had. And I didn't know that, so I said, okay. I said, now what? And so I asked our folks, what do you think we're at? How do you think we are? Which one do you think we distinguish more one way or the other? What do they think? They feel like we're more like the centered set more than anything else, because we haven't set up like even rules or anything like especially certain criteria of rejecting or welcoming people or whatever. And I guess that's sort of the idea that Lewis was talking about in that set, and understanding that the bounded set is like they got a set of rules and you need to follow this direction. This is where we're going. I don't know if that's exactly the same idea, but so we talked a little bit about that. But the church really feels, after I discussed what we had talked about on Friday, that we're more like definitely towards the centered set in a personal space, more so a personal type space setting. So
right. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, no, and it's good just to even ask the question. I mean, and the point is not that one is better or worse than the other. You need both.
Yes.
It's just that we got to know where to apply them appropriately. And I think where we get mixed up in the church is sometimes we put bounded sets, especially some of the larger settings, which makes it really difficult for people to break in. Or we don't have any bounded sets, and we're so centered that it's hard to know when we have people that are capable when as leaders, and when they can, it's hard to distinguish the committed from those who are just kind of still working their way toward that. And so I think it's important, as part of a general point, whether we're talking decentralization or not. I think it fits in with discipleship, but right. It does address the need for how we, or it does help us address how we structure different church programs and so forth, so that we know who the audience is and what and how where they are even in their walk with Christ,
Right.
and so that we can better tailor our ministry toward them. So, anyways, it's just there's a lot more to it which we don't have time to get into. I encourage you, if you're at all interested, to look at that book that Mark Baker from Fresno Pacific University has written.
Yeah, they were mostly interested, Lloyd, in the how especially when I brought up the idea of what the bridge between the sets, and that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So how do we go? And that was really, but and you go, Pastor, how do we do that? Well, I said, I'm talking. That's a good point, and I haven't really got an answer for that yet. I'll get back to you. I said, I'll get back to you.
There you go. There you go. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So why don't we plunge right into that, because we're going to talk about missional communities, and really, and which is that social space bridge, and we'll kind of see how that all fits into it. So let's just plunge right into that. That's maybe a good segue into our discussion this morning. So last time, well, you've seen this diagram a few times where we've looked at decentralization. Instead of putting everything on the Sunday morning worship experience, which limits the church from really growing and expanding, because of the fact that it's all centered on the public space, that by moving our churches to social space, centered in the social spaces, and then bringing them together in a hub with worship, that we then can maximize our ability of leadership. We can maximize our ability to touch people, reach people, begin to disciple people, and that is that bridge between the centered worship experience, the public space, and the personal space, which are typically small groups and where discipleship tends to happen. So we're going to focus today on the missional community side of this, and there is no way in a half an hour from now that we're going to have all the answers for you. But this is an area of really great interest to me. I did my doctoral work on this. I could talk for hours on this, and you really wouldn't want to get me started on that, because you'd be a long discussion. But and if you are interested more on the detail, hey, I'm moving in like less than 2 weeks, so if we could have coffee and chat in person if necessary at some point to work this through. But I want to give you at least kind of a taste on what it looks like. It's easy to say, hey, we need social space, we need these decentralized places that become bridges. But what does that really look like? And it's, yeah, I can't do it justice, but I want to give you at least some basic ideas as to what a missional community potentially could look like. So let's just kind of do a definition here. What is a missional community? And there's different names for them. And you're going to see everything from, right now, micro church is a big, there's a number of people using that. If you saw the video I sent you from Tampa, the underground, that's the terminology they use. I've seen everything from communities on mission to all sorts of stuff, gospel communities. I mean, I have a whole list that I've been accumulating of different names, and the name itself isn't important, but it's just I'm just making you aware of that, because you may see different terminology that all means the same thing. But essentially, a functional definition for this is a missional community. Or missional communities are groups of Christians, typically numbering between 20 and 50, so they're in that social size space, that define and organize themselves around God's mission to their local context. And I'll kind of flesh that out a little bit more, because that last part of the sentence is really important. So before we dig into the hows and the whats, I want to kind of reflect back on something I talked about at the Madera meeting back in February. And when we're talking about missional communities, I really want you to think New Testament oikos. So that's the Greek word. Oikos is for household. In the Greek world, that was the primary social structure of their time. And we really don't have an equivalent of that structure in our world today, because sometimes people have tried to apply it to family, and it's, yeah, kind of, but it's more than just a family. Because when we think of family, we think typically mother, father, 2.3 kids.
Right.
That's a family, the nuclear family, and that's not how they looked at families or households. In the Greek world, a household typically was, you had the family that was at the head of the household, but there were other families and individuals that lived in and were part of this household. So there was almost like a compound in some ways, like not super large, but you may have had within this household, this oikos, you could have had literally between 20 and 50 people. So it would have been, yes, immediate family, extended family, servants / slaves. Of course, definition of slave then was different than some of our understanding of that. But nevertheless, you had people that were connected to the household, that were living under one, well, sure, one roof is the right word, because even their houses were slightly different in terms of how they were constructed. But anyways, under one, they were living in one place, in one compound, so to speak, and they functioned together as a household. And that's in the Greek world how they lived, which is foreign to us because we don't typically do that. And so when we use the word family, we're always thinking, again, that the nuclear family, they had a bigger understanding. But you think of it, that's how the church really spread in the first century in particular, because they were able to achieve massive growth and reached a lot of people because they were decentralized. They had all these little oikoi, which is the plural of oikos, all over the place, and the gospel spread throughout the Roman Empire very naturally because it could hook into these small little communities that were already in place. Now, it's true, if you read the Bible, and we don't have time to get into all the history of this, that often, not always, but often, especially when Paul did his missionary journeys, he would start with Jewish communities. Because that, Paul being a Jew, and that was a natural, of course, Jesus as well, it was easy. It's kind of a natural point of contact to start with Jews, tell them about the Messiah, and use that as a point to spread. But even the Jews in those places were impacted by this social reality of oikos. And of course, as we see so many examples, as more Gentiles came into the church who were truly living in the oikoi or oikos fashion, that this fit in really well. And probably one of the best examples that I think people are familiar with is the conversion of the Philippian Jailer, who, when Paul and Silas, when they escaped, but actually didn't escape, and then as a result of this, the jailer accepted Christ, and then the whole family did. I mean, we're talking, again, not just went home, talked to the wife and 2 kids. It was a conversion of the oikos that they were part of that became a foundation for the church at Philippi. So exciting opportunities there that I believe were God ordained. That it was strategic way that the church was able to expand during that first century. So I tell you all that because really missional communities or micro churches, whatever terminology you want to use, are a way for us to take advantage of something that was happening in the first century, but make it relevant for today. And because we don't live in oikoi in our world today. So what would be a way that we could do this within the church to kind of replicate some of the same social structures? So what's really cool with missional communities is that they maximize social space. So we've been talking a lot about the different spaces, and we talked about public space, social space, personal space, intimate space, and we've recognized that probably social space is the one we're weakest at. Missional communities is a form that allows us to really build on that. And again, that's the genius of what happened in the first century, is that social space was where it all happened, and the church just mushroomed. The key on this, and this is one of the reasons we call these missional communities, because the terminology usage is really important, because it's about mission. You in order for missional communities to be successful, they have to be grounded on a purpose. If you're just going to form a group just to get together and hang out, that'll die pretty quickly. And I see churches that have done something like that. They say, "Oh, well, we need to get our people, I don't know, meet once in a while, have a dinner together, and
Right.
and just have a fellowship time." Well, the first few times that's fun, and then it loses its impact after a while, because, like, why are we doing this? But if it's built around purpose, around mission, that they're called to something, and we'll talk more about that a little later, that is where it really happens. And in my observation of missional communities, the ones that have the strongest mission are the ones that flourish. The ones that have weak mission do not tend to last very long.
Right.
Now, the other thing about missional communities, why missional communities, is they're optimal for incorporating outsiders. If you want to have a way to bring people into your church, bring them into that social space. Again, we've talked about this in the past, is it's a safe place for people to build connections without having to feel like they have to expose themselves. And so it's large enough that people feel that they're paid attention to, they're cared for, but small enough that they can feel connected, but large enough that there's enough distance that they can feel like they're not being threatened by having to reveal more of themselves than they're ready to at that point. It's a great seedbed for discipleship. It's where I think probably where discipleship begins to really start. I think ultimately we want to get people into the personal spaces. That's where discipleship, where the real nitty gritty of discipleship happens. But if you want to start exposing people to what it means to follow Christ, get them involved in a social size space like a missional community, where they can begin to see other people's lives in action and see how they're living their lives just by observing. And I think it has a lot of potential. And I think the goal within missional communities and this size is that ultimately, going back to that diagram that I showed you earlier, that this becomes the primary connection point for your congregation. That when they talk about the church, they're not thinking of what happens on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. or whatever time you meet. They're thinking of, man, I belong to this group. This is my point of identity. This is the group that is my this is where it all happens. This is the starting point. And I think you have reached that point when people say that. If you ask them about their church, they don't talk about Sunday morning, they don't talk about the worship service, they talk about the group of people that they're connected with. And that may seem like semantics, but it's more than semantics. It reveals what's really beginning to take shape within their lives and in their community. And then, so let's just talk a little more, then I'll open up for some questions, but just I'm trying to give you a bunch of information here, at least to start. So let's talk about what do missional communities, so what do they look like? So first of all, we've talked about this whole thing of mission. If you're going to form a missional community, it has to be around calling. There has to be some sort of a call of God on a group of people to minister to a neighborhood or a network. If it's just a fellowship group that meets just for the sake of meeting, that's going to fizzle out really quickly. And one of the things I've mentioned in the past, the social space sized group that's the best group to mobilize people for mission, because in smaller groups, in personal sized groups, the bonds are so tight relationally that it's hard to get them to go outside of those, out of that group to do anything. But in a social space sized group, the bonds are not as tight, and it's much easier therefore to mobilize them to do something for someone else. And what I would say is, don't start a missional community without that community having a calling to something, whether it's a neighborhood, like an area in which they live, or a network, which basically would mean a group of people that need Christ, or where there needs to be a difference made in the world. That is, once you have a calling to that, then you build a community that's designed to serve that particular need, whatever that might be. So it's really built around calling, it's built around mission. But having said that, we still want to make sure that we're incorporating other aspects of church life. And there's the three big ones: up, in, and out, which is worship, community, and mission. You still want to make sure that that up piece is there, that there's a connection with God. This isn't just a social group or a social services group. It's a group that really has its foundation in Christ. There's you're building community, you're building connections and relationships among people as best as possible, and of course then the out, the mission portion of it. Who leads a missional community? This fits really well into our session last time, and so if you didn't see last week's session, make sure you go back and take a look at that, because we talked about the as we looked at the different bounded and centered sets, and then the Guder funnel, we looked at the tip of the spear. You need this bounded set discipleship core. There has to be people at the front end of this that are deeply committed to Christ, and that become the primary modelers of what it means to follow Jesus. And so this is the group, or individuals within that group, that are leading the missional community. If you form a missional community without this smaller core, basically a personal sized group core, your missional community is going to lack strength. And then the last thing I would say, as far as missional communities are concerned, is to you want to, whatever you're doing with them, is to establish predictable patterns. You want to you want to create new rhythms in your life, and that includes everything from when do you meet, when you do meet, what do you do. The missional communities that I've been involved with all have centered, one of the patterns that they have incorporated into their life is a meal together. So when they do get together, they're just not meeting in a formal sense. It's meeting around a table, it's sharing food, it's just, a lot of it is just chit chat, just talking about the stuff that's going on in your world. But that's okay. That's how you begin to learn about other people, trust other people, and people who maybe are further away from Christ begin to watch us and enter into our life. So that's kind of definition-wise some things about missional communities. So I know this raises a lot of questions. In just a moment, I'm going to talk, but before we do that, I want to just stop and make sure there's any questions that need to be addressed. And I'll talk about how might you form a missional community, and then I'll tell you my story. Well, in fact, let me tell you this first, and then I'll talk later about how you might want to try something like this yourself. But so as Kathy and I are looking to move, well, I mean, we're in the process of moving. I'm packing up stuff. Kathy's already down there. We got a house. I'll be out of here on the 31st, so that's like 11 days from now. As we move into our new house, one of the things that we were doing as we were looking to buy a house is that we were being very intentional that whatever house we would buy, was conducive to hosting social space sized groups.
Right.
So we ruled out a lot of houses just by virtue of the fact that they didn't meet that criteria. We wanted openness, space, so that we could get 20 to 30 people in there, maybe not 50, but 20 to 30 who could be in there, even if not comfortably, at least comfortable enough that we could just have times where we could host people and begin to build community. That's a big important thing for us, because our goal is to build a missional community out of our home. And so as we were looking for a house, that was on the list. And so what our plan is that once we get, I don't know if we'll ever get fully unpacked, but once we get largely unpacked and kind of our lives in normal, as we begin to build relationships with people, begin to have regular meal times, and not daily, but maybe eventually maybe once a week, but even to start with once or twice a month, where we would invite people, even people from our neighborhood, people just to come, and without agenda, just to get to know us and just to hang out and be there. But as a result of that, to begin to engage people in conversation and to be able to build trust and build relationships, so that we can again move people toward, this is that whole centered set thing. We want to start helping people move toward Christ, and we have no idea where people are, but we believe that by building relationships, we have an opportunity to start to, within our neighborhood, right where we are, to start to build connections. And our goal is out of that to be able to identify some people who would be ready for following Christ at a deeper level and maybe enter into more of a personal space-sized discipleship type community, where we say, hey, if you're interested in learning more about what it means to follow Jesus, we're going to meet a few times a month in just a smaller setting, just to look at that and kind of explore what does it mean to follow Jesus. So out of that, we would see then this social space group, this missional community of people from all over, of different places in their journey spiritually, with a goal to move them toward Christ. And that's kind of what we have, in our vision for what God has for us as we go forward. And so that's something we can do. Anybody can do that. It's just, it's a place for us. That's a place where we're starting, is to do that. And then out of that, see wherever it is that God leads us. So that kind of gives you a little picture of what we're doing. And I'll talk a little bit more in just a moment in terms of what might be some steps that you might want to take if you want to incorporate missional communities. But before we do that, let's answer some questions, because I've given you tons of information. I'll turn the sharing off here. What might be some questions you might have based on what I've shared with you so far?
Well, I'd ask one question, is how important is it to let the people know direction? Like, which way are we headed? Are you headed towards this direction or this direction? And also, is it important for them to know the core values of who we are, and is it to get it right out front? I think, or do we wait on that, before we, enter into that? So is direction important, is what I'm saying.
So I'm not sure I understand what you mean by direction.
Okay.
Give me an example, because I'm not sure I'm completely hearing you.
Basically, I think what I'm really talking about is direction of what we want to be. Like you're talking about, you and Kathy are talking about what you like. Basically, you're talking about the plan that you have, okay, for what you want to do as a missional community or a missional gathering or whatever. So is it important, as we invite people to our church, to invite people to join us, they know where we're going with this and what we want and what we're expecting and what we're hoping for and praying for? Is it important for them to know that right off the bat, or just a time of just inviting them to join us in a conversation more than anything else, and then we build from that?
Yeah, see, I no, so let me answer that. And I mean, your question is important because it reflects kind of a core question that we often ask in the church, because we're thinking always programmatically, and therefore we always have to make sure that we're defining these things. I think in this particular setting, I mean, not that I definitely don't want to be deceptive, or I wouldn't tell
Right.
people. It's not that I would try to um, I mean, if people are asking what we're doing, they would know why we're doing what we're doing. But I'm not going out there and saying, well, come to my house because we're starting
Okay.
a church or a missional community. I'm just saying, and honestly, legitimate. I can say this as, and not just as a ploy, because I don't. If it's just a ploy to bait and switch people, that's not healthy. But just to really say to people, um, and I think we could say it this way, which would be, I think people would identify with. Our goal is to get to know people in our neighborhood, and of course, as we're engaging with them, and they find out our passions and our interests, and we can tell them, hey, we're people of faith, and we want to see people, we follow Jesus, and we're passionate about helping people follow Jesus. And we can say that simply without preaching and without getting into a long, you know, without hitting them,
Yeah.
between the eyes with some hard sell. But no, we're forming something that is and that's the beauty of social space. It's a bridging thing. It's not see, if we were doing a public space thing, you would have to define it much more clearly. You'd have to say, this is a church meeting. We're meeting to worship. We're meeting to preach, or whatever. And if we were doing a small group where we're doing discipleship, you'd have to, and especially because those tend to be centered, bounded sets, you have to say, well, hey, this is a group where we're committed to learning more about how to follow Christ. And we're working through that. And so you have to be explicit at that point. But in this setting, you can, and you can say, hey, our goal is to make a difference in our community, and we want to get to know our neighbors. And I think people would accept that. And if they see that we're genuine, authentic, we're not there to try to, as soon as they come, we're not inviting them, and as soon as they come, we're gonna have dinner, and then we're going to hand out Bibles and say, well, we're going to do a Bible study right now. I mean, they would go, well, hey, you did not tell me that. Why are you trying to preach at me at this moment? We would invite them into that opportunity at other places. So I don't know. Does that help?
That does help a lot, Lloyd. Yeah, it does. Thank you. That does help.
Well, I kind of wonder, Lloyd, just asking the question. Okay, so you develop a model of you invite people just generally to get to know them. I understand that.
Yeah.
And at some point when they come, uh, is it like you said, chit chat, find out who they are, uh, somehow indirectly an expression of care for them as neighbors, and maybe talk about the neighborhood. I was wondering, Lloyd, I have a question for you. What general area of Fresno are you going to settle in, since I know Fresno real well?
Yeah. Well, we are, our house is south of Kings Canyon Road.
Okay.
And west of Temperance.
Okay, kind of Clovis South, yeah.
Yeah, way over there, south of the 180.
Yeah. Well, you got far enough over. I was concerned about you when you said south of Kings Canyon. Because I know if you're north of Kings Canyon and then heading more to Fresno Central, then you run into a much more challenging community.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, anyhow, that's good. Well, that's a good area. I think that's out by the new high school, Clovis East. I think a little bit and all that. Relatively newer community. As far as growth wise and all that. That's good. That would be I think that's a good place to. Yeah, I'm just thinking about you starting something like that, because I'm in a little town of Carruthers. Okay, that's where I live. And if I should do a missional community, I have to choose either I do it towards the church, in that area, or I find somebody, or I find 2-3 people, and you tell me how this works. Let's say I have about 3-4 people that are willing to do something. Let's say, because our church is no bigger than almost a missional community, maybe bigger than that, but as far as regular attenders right now after COVID. So I'm saying if there are 3-4 people willing to do something, in terms of directing them, would you say, okay, you don't want to start, we're not starting a Bible study per se. I'd like to know the principles of how you, in other words, if people are saying, hey, we'd like to do something, we're willing to host something, and what do we do? How do we do it?
Yeah. So I think that's where a principle, and I think it's a principle that comes from Scripture, where Jesus, when he sent out his disciples on missionary trips, he talked about people of peace. You find the people that are receptive to what you're offering, and not only receptive, but perhaps even reciprocate to what you're offering. You work with people like that, and you build. I mean, you invite everyone, but you really hone in on those that begin to where the relationship starts to develop, and there's openness and there's willingness to engage, and that's where I think a person has to be discerning and say, well, hey, there's a few people that I've been dealing with, like we've invited a whole bunch of people, we've had some good talks, but there's 1 or 2 families or 1 or 2 individuals that really seem to we click with really well. It's been good. We're going to focus in on especially on those individuals, and eventually, as you're having conversations with them, invite them into deeper dives. Could be into something like a discipling relationship or something if they're ready for it. You just discern at what point they're ready to move to the next step. It's all part of this centered set thing of when you see that they're getting closer to Christ and they're open to what you're offering, that you can then open the door for them. And maybe out of that, they can get to the place where they can be hosting or being part of what you're trying to do in that community.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Well, it's hard, but the actual implication, I mean, what do you do? Go out and visit neighbors door to door? I mean, how do you make your initial contacts in a new neighborhood where you don't know anybody?
Yeah. No, that's right. No, absolutely. No, you're right. And it's not like, totally get it, because we started something like that in the neighborhood that we currently live in, and which we moved in 11 years ago. And you just do it as you're talking to people. In fact, Kathy's already told me she's met a couple of the neighbors across the street from where our new house is. And, part of it is as you're outside, you just take the time to begin to engage with people. And you find out very quickly. We had this experience here where in our current house, where we started this process already in this current house. It's not like we haven't done this before. And there was a family across the street. I don't know if I've shared this here or not, but if not, I'll share it again here. There's a family across the street that, you see them coming and going, and you talk. And this family, I mean, they're really nice people, but they are not at all like Kathy and I. I mean, they are just completely different. Their lifestyle, their things they're interested in. It's just they live a whole entirely different life. But we just really we had really good connections, and out of that, just chatted here and there, and I don't know, just various little things that come up, or sometimes we just took effort to get to know them because they were open to it. And the thing that made the difference that we really noticed is that at one point they were so appreciative of just the fact that we took time to talk to them. Their daughter, who was I think 3 at the time, was having her birthday party. This family was really big into birthday parties. They invited us to their 3-year-old daughter's birthday party. And that was an experience in itself, because again, this family live a whole different lifestyle than we do. And this was not the kind of birthday party. In fact, it wasn't a birthday party for the kids. It was more a birthday party for the adults. And there was a lot of drinking going on and all sorts of stuff. But just the fact that they would invite us to this birthday party was amazing. Because what that said, that they liked us, they trusted us. And, out of that has come some amazing things. We still, to this day, even though they've moved to a different place now, we still have close contact with them. They Kathy and the woman have had many conversations over coffee and some really deep spiritual discussions even that have emerged from that because there's trust that has developed. So yeah, it happens organically. It's not like we send flyers out in the neighborhood. And although we did that once, we did at Christmas time once, we say, hey, we're going to do a Christmas open house for our neighbors on a Saturday evening or something. And that actually worked out well. But we're not trying to send the message we're starting something and this isn't a program. This is just us being us. And we just want to do something that touches people's lives. And you become known as the neighbor that's interested in other neighbors.
Right. So in other words, Lloyd, it's just like an idea of just gathering together as a community and just having conversation with people and more than anything, and then see where it goes from there.
Yeah, but with intention. So I think part of it is the intentionality of knowing that we're doing this not just for the fun of it. I mean, although it is fun, but we really want to be discerning, and we really got to pray through this to really allow the Holy Spirit to guide us as to, okay, where do we want to put our efforts? Where are there places we need to maybe challenge people more? Where are there opportunities for us to make a difference? So yeah. I mean, I'll give you another example. And so I don't want to just dominate with my time, but because of my Canadian roots and my love for hockey, and of course, Malcolm, I'm really into hockey right now. Hopefully tonight's going to go better than the other night, but that's another story. But apart from that, we actually started here in Yakima, Washington. We started because I was looking at it and say, how can I begin to build relationships with people that I don't know? And I said, well, I like hockey, and I know there's people around here that like hockey. It's not the number one sport, but in a city of our size, there's people that like hockey. And so I just started putting the word out that I'm going to meet on, and so I found a restaurant in town here that had the screens and all this kind of stuff, and they had the NHL subscription. And I said, we're going to meet on Saturday nights for dinner and watch hockey for anybody that wants to get to know other people and watch hockey. And it was purely just that, just as a way to build relationships with other hockey people. We called it, and Malcolm, you'll appreciate this, we called
Hockey
it
Night in Yakima.
Hockey Night in Yakima. Yeah, exactly. and of course, a lot of people didn't understand maybe why I used that terminology. But apart from that, it was fun. We got to, and there to this day, we have relationships out of that. In fact, and I don't even have time to do this because we've only got 8 minutes left. I have this really fascinating, an atheist friend in Fresno who lived in, actually, what is really weird, Malcolm, you'll appreciate this. He grew up in Edmonton. He was living in Yakima, and now he's living in Fresno. Yeah. Now, you tell me if God's not.
Somebody's following you, Lloyd.
that is just weird. But this guy, and I won't, because he's a public figure. He's actually somebody that has, I won't give a lot of details away right here, but he's actually somebody that has some public prominence in Central California.
Okay.
And but he would call himself an atheist. But we keep in contact. In fact, he's just dying to have us come to live in Fresno and to reconnect and stuff. But it all started because of hockey.
Really?
Yeah. And so those are opportunities you just don't, when God presents those opportunities, you run with them.
Okay. So that sounds great. That's giving me a lot of ideas, Lloyd.
So let me give you, because we don't have time. I wish if we could talk more, but so let me give you an assignment here. So here's kind of the assignment as a way to start thinking about this. Oh, I guess I got to share the screen. Hang on. This is not going to help. Okay. The easiest way to start a missional community is to begin with your family. In other words, just become a family on mission. So if you don't even have, I mean, you could, and in the case of, those of you that are on the call today, you're in small churches that you're saying already maybe are a missional community size, and that's certainly a way to do it. Would begin to start. You could certainly do that with that group of people, or the other way to do it is just start living this out within your own family. Just begin to build, say, hey, my mission field, my calling is to my community. my neighborhood, the people around me, and it doesn't have to be the people around. It could be what we call a network. So if you know of a group of people that you wanted to connect with, you could hone in on that. But it could be something as simple as just getting to start doing things with your neighbors and see if there are people of peace in your neighborhood, and just start building relationships with them and invite them into community in a centered setting where, and many of them might be really far from Christ, but the goal is that as you build relationships with them, that they begin to see Christ in you, through you, and they begin to walk closer. I think that would be one of the best, everybody could do this. You don't have to be a pastor. You don't have to, you don't have to have a lot of skills. Just start connecting with people around you and invite them into your life, so they can kind of see what you're up to and who you are, and that could be a starting place to move people toward Christ and greater discipleship. So one of the things here's the question as part of the assignment. What is a mission opportunity in your city? And it could be small. Yeah. I mean, it could be Carruthers, it could be Hanford, and it could be Fresno. I mean, I don't think size matters. I've seen this done. I know of this being done in rural communities. And it's fascinating how that happens. But what mission opportunity in your city could be the basis for a missional community? Do you see a calling that God has put on your life? And what you're called to might be totally different than what I'm called to. I'm called, and in light of the house that we've purchased, I'm called to that community.
Right.
But it could be your neighborhood, but it could be, I don't know, it could be some other group of people in your city, in your area, that you feel that this is where God has called you to reach out to, and just start by building connections and inviting them into this, like a public a social sized space where it's safe for them to get to know you, get to know others, and then just let God do his work. Don't have to force it. You don't have to be banging people over the head to try to get their attention. Just begin to enter in relationship and see the people that are ready to respond to wherever it is that Christ is leading them.
I hear it.
So take a look at that. Give me reach out to me if you have any contact. We can spend more time on this next week, but hopefully that gives you some ideas. And again, there's way more than we could ever talk in today. We'll pick up a little bit more on this next week, but I wanted to at least introduce the concept and take it from there. Anybody else, any comments or questions before we wrap up?
Just thanks, Lloyd. This is perfect. I gotta go. Well, I'm looking forward to presenting this to our folks. I always enjoy talking to them about my next assignment. So, which is I actually presented to them because it's part of their assignment too. Yeah, if we're going to go forward with it. So I enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think the key, Malcolm, would just be, because I and I would say this to anybody, but just as you bring it up here, as you're sharing this with people, just recognize that when people are listening to you say it, because of the way we're conditioned, people hear programs and they hear these highly structured things, and that can scare them off. I think we've got to help people understand that this can be very organic and very simple, where they just begin to live it out.
Just live it. Yeah.
Just live it. Just start doing it. You don't have to, be some sort of a big expert. You don't have to even have like evangelistic gifts to do this. You just have to be yourself and let God do the work. And just, I've seen some people who've done this type of thing that are, I mean, they're just even like terrible introverts, and I'm an introvert, but just like super introverts,
right?
That because of the love and care that they express can do this really, really well. In fact, if you're interested, I don't know if any of you do podcasts, there's a podcast out there called, I'll give you the name of it here. It's called Everyday Mission. And the whole purpose of the podcast is it says, the podcast giving you stories, ideas, and encouragement for mission in your everyday. And what they do is they just tell stories, and they interview people who are doing this type of thing wherever it is that they're at. And they're fun because and you go back and listen to some of the past episodes and you listen forward as well. Just interesting stories. And that in itself could give you all sorts of crazy ideas as to how you can start doing mission, and out of that mission build community. That's the beauty of this. I want you to hear this. That's where this whole decentralization piece comes out. It's not just a matter of, you go out and do mission. Yes, that's true. But the goal is we want to do this in community. And as we do it in community, then that's how we build the church. And that's how the church begins to take shape and begin to reveal itself. So
I got it, Lloyd. I loaded it on my
Oh,
phone.
good. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Great.
Good. Anybody else? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. Let me pray and then we can wrap it up.
All
Yeah.
right.
Let's take a moment to do that. Lord, just thank you for your presence here with us today. I thank you for those that are on the call and those who will be watching this call later, that they will not get overwhelmed with all this information, that this won't be just some newfangled program that we're trying to drum up, but Lord, that out of this, the heart of Jesus would be experience in our lives, and that we would begin to see the potential for reaching the world in the name of Jesus, and that we would be able to make a difference wherever we're planted, and that out of that communities would grow and flourish, and that your kingdom would grow because of your church expanding and finding new places to minister. So God, thank you. Thank you for the way that you work in our lives and our hearts. And we just look forward to whatever the possibilities are that you are leading us toward. We pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
So next week, Michael should be sending out some notifications. We should be back on Zoom. He'll be running things. I'll send out a notice about the video for this, and be in touch.
Great.
All
Thanks,
right.
Lloyd.
Appreciate your time.
Take care, y'all.
Hey,
All
guys.
right. Have a good
Bye-bye.
day.